If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole Bianchi, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Hi, friends and brave leaders. Thank you so much for being here. Today, this episode is dropping on the anniversary of 9/11, and I want to tell you a story about small, brave moves in action, but also dedicate this episode to Todd Beamer. So I start Small Brave Moves with an introductory chapter that actually references Todd's moves that he made on 9/11. So he shouted, "Let's roll." Those were the last audible words of Todd Beamer, a passenger on the hijacked United Airlines Flight 93. Todd discussed their options with other passengers and flight attendants, and then they voted on a course of action. Ultimately, they decided to storm the cockpit and take over the plane. The group was planning to jump on the hijackers and fly the plane into the ground before the hijackers could follow through with their plan. First, Todd Beamer recited the Lord's Prayer and Psalm 23 and prompted others to join in. And then he said, "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll." In a November 8, 2001 address from the World Congress Center in Atlanta, Georgia, George W. Bush invoked Beamer's words. Some of our greatest moments have been acts of courage for which no one could have been prepared. So think about that for a minute. No one could have been prepared. And he's absolutely right. I have to believe that Todd led a life of small, brave moves, practicing mindsets, behaviors, and habits that better prepared him for that moment, that day. And so this episode is dedicated for everyone that was impacted, our entire nation, those that were there, those that stood up and did something, those that ran in while others were running out, to all of you. A story I want to share also is I was pregnant with our middle child, Joe, on 9/11, and he was set to be due on September 28th. And a couple of days after 9/11 and the stress and the impact, and our nation was grieving, and we were very much as well, that Joe decided to come quite early, 2.5 weeks early, not as planned. And when I think about somebody who really emulates small, brave moves, I think about Joe. And so I want to share a story about him making a small, brave move. So I was studying bravery in front of us and then bravery behind us as I was preparing and doing research for small, brave moves. And I remember walking in the door from a client trip in Florida, and I was anxious to try out my new research questions. And as I walked in, Joe was right there in our kitchen. And he had just walked in from playing a high school lacrosse game. And so after a big sweaty hug I love to give him after games, I asked him, "Joe, what's the bravest thing you did today?" I thought I would test it out, not thinking I would get necessarily anything in that moment. And he said, "Oh, Mom, I played goalie at my lacrosse game. No one else wanted to, and I didn't either." In fact, for those of you that know anything about lacrosse, he plays face-off, which is the starter position. And so not had ever played goalie before. And evidently the goalie was sick this day. So what you should also know is these balls are coming at you, these hard balls, 90 to 100 miles per hour as a goalie. And there's not a lot of padding in there. So Joe goes on to say, in the words of my 16-year-old at the time, "Mom, I just didn't want to get my nuts racked." And I am loving the pureness of his honesty in this moment. But here's where it got real interesting. He went on to say, "Mom, I did it for the team so we could have the best chance to compete. And it turns out I'm not a bad goalie. And I learned so much from the goalie's point of view. It's so much harder than it looks. And the goalie may be the biggest leader on the field." And in that moment, I remember feeling such an overwhelming, emotion of pride, not just for him saying yes to the opportunity and trying something new, but the pride in his self awareness and connecting the moves he made to being brave in that moment. Nobody was raising their hand for goalie that day. Joe happened to. And think about what Joe would have missed out on had he not raised his hand, said yes to a new opportunity, or maybe was even fearful of losing his starting position as a face-off in that moment. But what we know is bravery is an acquired behavior and it takes practice. We have to practice those brave moments to overcome our fears, just like Joe did. And when we're trying to be better at something, what do? We have to practice. Bravery plus leadership creates a competitive advantage for us as leaders, just like Todd Beamer that day on 9/11, just like the first responders who ran into the buildings to help others, and so many more who showed up in powerful ways that day. Today, Joe Bianchi, who was born 3 days after 9/11 and 23 years later, is sitting in a fire academy preparing to be a first responder, those that are running into the buildings while others are running out. Joe, you emulate bravery and leadership and practice bravery through so many of the moves that you make. And I know you will as you continue to take on this new career as a firefighter. I'm so proud of you and I love you so much. So, today on 9/11, my challenge for you is to practice one small brave move today, just like Todd Beamer that day on 9/11. Have an amazing day. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams, page-turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes, and let's do this together, one small brave move at a time. See you next week.